So after you develop your project charter, the second process that you do in part of initiation process group is you identify your stakeholders. We already know who stakeholders are and what is stakeholder. So let's look at the stakeholder management knowledge area. In the first process, which is stakeholder management. So after we understand of the stakeholder management, who are stakeholders, where they're supposed to be engaged, where they're supposed to be planned. So there are 4 processes: identify stakeholders. Of course, you plan stakeholder management, engage stakeholder management, and monitor stakeholder management. So that's the way it's, you need to develop the logical sequence of how the processes flow. What are the processes? So that way you don't have to remember them, but you just simply know them. So the first process is identify stakeholder in stakeholder management. And overall, the first process that you start the project with is develop your project charter. Once you develop the project charter, you have to identify your stakeholders. See, later on, you need to know requirements, right? What is a project? What are the elements? What is the success criteria? Who will tell you this? It's the stakeholders. So that's where you need to identify them first before you go to planning. The process of identifying project stakeholder regularly and analyzing and documenting relevant information regarding their interest, involvement, interdependencies, influence, and potential impact on the project success. The key benefit of this process is that it enables the project team to identify the appropriate focus for engagement of each stakeholder or the group of stakeholders. Now, this process is performed periodically throughout the project as needed. Means that previous stakeholders, they move out and new stakeholders came in. So you have to do this process, right? Identify stakeholders, know who they are, what is the impact towards the project, what they're interested in towards the project, and so forth. So inputs for this is project charter. Now you can think of this, where the project charter come from? Of course, from the previous process, which is where you develop the project charter, right? So that actually become output from that process, become input to the second process. So that's how the link between the processes are. Project documents, of course, you have to have the business case, your benefits management plan, and we know all of them. We know both of the 3 documents. Project management plan. Now, in that case, whatever is available to you is applicable here. If you don't have something, whatever we are mentioning, that means it's not applicable. But of course, highly recommended that you already have a communication plan. Understanding or consideration is that since you are an organization, you may already have a communication plan. So every time you do a project, you just take the old plan, remember it becomes your process asset, and you just customize a little bit and use it for the new project, all right? Unless if it's drastically changing. So that's where you have a communication plan. You may also have stakeholder engagement plan. Now, some of these plans, you don't have to make them again and again. You make them one time and just customize it a little bit and use it for the new project. And they are actually part of your process assets. Then you may have some project documents, such as you may have a change log that, again, the name suggests it's a log of changes. You have issues log, which is, again, list of issues. You have requirement documentation. What are the requirements in the project? Now, again, project documents, if applicable, if you have them, they are there. If you don't have them, you can create one, or as you move on with the project, you will create them later on. Remember, and you need to understand this phenomena. Some of the processes or most of the processes are iterative process, right? So maybe one document is not an input right now, but it will be input when you do it later on. So in the beginning, when you do identify stakeholders, this process, you don't have change log. But let's say after 6 months down the line, you're going to do identify stakeholders again. At that time, maybe you have the change log with maybe some information of the changes requested. So that's how things work out. Make sure that you know this well. So agreements, if you have enterprise environmental factors, which means your company policy, rules, regulations, and so forth. And then organization process assets, whatever is applicable. So template of the identify stakeholder or stakeholder register is actually your process asset as well, which again, I will share with you. So you should have it by the time you go through this video. So tools and techniques, of course, we talk about expert judgment. It's the same one, but here we're talking about your expertise and how you identify stakeholders. Data gathering, questionnaires and surveys, your brainstorming. What's the difference between questionnaires and surveys? So remember, brainstorming is where you bring all the people, different people, and you collect ideas, right? So that's one of the technique. The questionnaire and survey. So the difference is questionnaires are for specific audience, maybe for specific product, all right? And it's not long survey or long questionnaire. It's very specific, maybe 2 pages, 3 pages. Whereas survey can be longer and it's for generic audience, all right? And mostly through survey, you get some statistical results. Like for example, as I said, how many people they want the puff up evacuation, right? Or ejaculation. So that's where, let's say 5,000 people in the university, they said they need the roller one, all right? And another 3,000 said they need the puff up one. So that's how you get the statistical data, right, through surveys. Data analysis, again, that's stakeholder analysis and document analysis. We'll talk about stakeholder analysis in a few minutes. Document analysis, what is the first document you have now if you are executing the project? You have a project charter, right? It's signed as well. So analyze that document. Who are the stakeholders there? So maybe one of the stakeholders, the sponsor, is the first stakeholder, right? Maybe he already mentioned that the quality manager will be, for example, let's say Khalid, right? So now Khalid is going to be your another stakeholder because his name is mentioned there. So just like this one, you may identify different stakeholders through your project charter and any other document analysis that you have to do. Like if you have agreements, go through the agreement. Some of those people, they're also part of your stakeholders. Data representation, so you can do stakeholder mapping or representation. For example, who report to who and so forth. And then of course your meetings. Now output from this process. So think about the name. The process name is identify stakeholder. So what do you think is the output? It's the stakeholder register, right? Or list of stakeholders. Now, of course, you have some other documents as well. You may come up with a change request, right? Stakeholders may request for change, or maybe a stakeholder himself supposed to be replaced in your project management. So you may have change request. If it's applicable, it's there. Otherwise, maybe later on when you do your stakeholder or identify stakeholder, you may have this output. Of course, some other project management plan updates. You may not update them right now because it's so early, but as you move on, you may update your requirements management plan, communication plan, risk management plan, stakeholder engagement plan, because maybe based on a specific stakeholder, you have to engage them in a different way. Then project document updates, assumption log, issues log, and risk register, right? Again, some of those documents, you don't know them yet, but as we cover more information, you will know them. Right. Now, carrying on with your identify stakeholders. So once I cover, majorly, what I do is I try to give you more explanation on this slide. And the reason is that once you go through this verbally and you look at the item itself, you need to visualize and put this information in your brain, right? So it will become the subconscious information. So whenever you see the word, it will bring back the concept and the idea, right? And then once you go through the slides, you can read the details there. So like, for example, next slide will have explanation of some of these items. We'll talk about project management plan, project documents, all right? And of course, some of these will be covered in more detail later on. So you have your data analysis here, right? So we're talking about who are, what are the data you have, right? So you need to also have understanding of your list of stakeholders. What is their position in the organization? What is their role in the organization? What is their stake? What are the expectations? What about their attitudes, right? What about their interest? So stakeholders, some of them, they may be interested in the testing phase, or some of them, they're interested in the building or design phase. So you need to know that which stakeholder is interested where, right? So you can deal with them accordingly. Also, the stakeholders analysis is including in interest, their rights, the ownership, the knowledge, the contribution of the stakeholder. So a question that I normally ask, you have two stakeholders. One is a fresh graduate and the other one is a PhD holder. So who do you think is a tough stakeholder or will actually bug you more? Yes, that's your PhD stakeholder, right? Because he already or she already has a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, and they're going to backfire with you or maybe challenge you more, right? Compared to the one who's fresh graduate. So you need to know your stakeholders, what is their knowledge level and so forth, what is their experience. And of course, we talk about document analysis already. So data representation, you may have multiple grids when you are going to map your stakeholder, right? And so you understand where they fit. So the grids can be based on the power, and authority, maybe based on the influence, right? Maybe based on the interest. So we'll look at the power and interest grid, all right, in a minute. So we see how it is used and you understand that which stakeholder stands for you. You may also have a stakeholder cube, right? This combines the grid element, which is three-dimensional. Again, it could be the engagement of the stakeholders, all right, to identify their teams and make sure that you use your stakeholders in the best way possible. Again, you can use multiple type of grids and multiple type of dimensions. It could be the finance. So which stakeholder is helping you financially, technical side, and then operational side, right? So multiple dimensions of your stakeholders. Salience model describes the classes of stakeholders. So simply once you identify stakeholder, you can put up a list of elements, right? It can be one of the Excel format type of a table, right? Kind of like a matrix. So the matrix could be based on the power. So which stakeholders have more power based on the urgency, based on the legitimacy, and so forth. Then you have direction of influence. So which stakeholder report to who? So again, you can put their names and use the arrows so you know that who reports to who, and also what about the power? Power always goes upward, and then of course the influence goes downward, and so forth. Then which stakeholder has the priority? Which stakeholder you will hear first? So I would like to share one of my story. I was working, and that was my first job. That was kids clothing in New Jersey. So I was hired by this operations manager, and one day he asked me to do something, and I was going to do the task. Whereas Sam, who was the owner of the company, he asked me like, "Hey, please, can you do this?" And I kept going the way where I was going to do the work for the project or operation manager. And then, after like few seconds, Sam called me back. Hey, can you please come here? Where are you going? I told him I'm going this way to do the task which Muhammad asked me to do. And then he's like, who am I? I'm like, you're the owner. So he says, okay, you do first what I asked for, right? So this is how you need to understand the priority as well. So what is needed to be done based on which stakeholder. So make sure that you know who has more power, more influence, and which stakeholder has priority. All right, so meetings, of course, we already understand. Meetings have to be there. So this is the grid, all right, and this is power interest grid. Now what you can do is on the right side with power or with interest at the bottom as well. So on the Y and X axis, put the numbers from 1 to 10. And let's say we have Khalid. Now let's think Khalid, where Khalid stands. So Khalid is, I don't have Khalid. So let's say I have Fahad. So Fahad is here, based on the power, it's from, let's say you get 6. And based on the interest, you get 9. All right, some technical glitch there, but I think it'll be solved. All right, so let's go back to our grid. So here we are talking about Fahad, right? So let me say it again. We have 1 to 10, and from power perspective, I see that Fahad is 10 because he also have some influence on decisions, and he can make some decisions, right? So that's where I get to know about his power. And then from interest perspective, he wants to know everything. What's this? What's that? He's giving the feedback, right? So he's very much interested. Interest is 9, power is 6. So he ends up here in this quadrant, right? Just like this one, we have Ahmed. Ahmed, again, power is 6. And then again, interest is not that much, right? So he's not very much, attending the meeting about what's about the project. He already missed one of the meetings, all right, with the board. So he is not into that much in the project. So interest is less, maybe 4. So he ends up in this area. So what I do is once I identify all the stakeholders, I put them based on the value, right? Evaluation in the grid. So in this quadrant, you understand that on the top right, these are the people you need to manage closely, involve them, talk to them, make sure that they know what's happening in the project, make sure they attend all the meetings, they are updated with the information, right? So they are the one who are actually going to help you with decisions as well, and so forth. Then you have the top left corner, which is keep them satisfied. Remember, they have high power, right? So how you keep them satisfied is based on what are their requirements to the project, what are their expectations to the project. Talk to them, right? So communicate them based on their requirements and expectations. Then you have people with the high interest, right? So you have on the bottom right, which is you need to keep them informed. Let them know what's happening about the project, what's going on. And then you have people who are less power, less interest, You just need to monitor them, right? Monitor to make sure that maybe their evaluation towards the project, their assessment toward the project, their role toward the project may change. So if that will change, you also have to change their engagement as well, right? So right now, you just keep them in email, which you send monthly report, right? So they are part of the CC. But then if they change, you may have to put them in a group of people where you actually meet them, right, and present them every week. So make sure that which stakeholder is where and engage them accordingly. Are you going to put them only in email, or are you going to put them in a group where you present them every week? So that's where you can use, and you can change the grid as well, right? You can use power influence grid as well, or influence interest grid, and so forth. By the way, any one of them could be fine and give you a very good idea about your stakeholders. So we already understand your stakeholders output. So identification information about stakeholders, who they are, the organization position, their location, the details, the role in the project. Assessment information. So what is the major requirement of these stakeholders in the project? What is their potential to influence the outcome? Maybe they're the one who are going to sign on your sign off, right? And what about if you don't really take care of the stakeholder and you find out that he's the key person who's actually helping you to get your funds? Stakeholder classification. So that could be multiple classification, internal stakeholders, external stakeholders. We're talking about within your organization or outside your organization. Impact, based again on impact, influence, power, interest. Again, the classification could be technical stakeholders, non-technical stakeholders, all right, and so forth. So it depends on you how you classify stakeholders. Now, one of the classification, which actually you have to be careful that if you do, this stakeholder identification document is your document to keep, all right? You don't make it public. So one of the classification could be positive stakeholder, neutral stakeholder, or negative stakeholder. Again, that's only for you, but you need to pick right word that if your document goes out, you should not be embarrassed. All right, so change request, maybe if it's there, project manual plan updates and document updates, whatever is applicable and it is required at that situation, you will update. Otherwise, just ignore. So at this point of time, you need to do a stakeholder register, right? Based on the template that I share with you, you also need to identify stakeholder, and we'll agree in our meeting on how to do that, right? And how to visually or virtually agree on your stakeholders. So let's move on to planning. Now that completes your initiation stage, right? So you start the project, you develop project charter, and you identify your stakeholders. So now I would assume that your charter is done and you already know your stakeholders. Let's carry on with the planning, right? And I'll just go with the overview of the planning. So this slide is very important. You will go through this again and again, all right, to make sure that what's happening, and majorly after we complete our planning. So what happens is when you start the project planning, and you can see the boxes there, right? And you can see the arrows. So what happens is you start with the project manual plan. So that's the first process you start with. But actually, that's the last process you end with. So project manual plan, think of this as a folder. And in that folder, there are all other plans, such as your communication plan, your procurement plan, your risk management plan. All the plans are within this folder. So you start making, you start getting the folder. So you start with the developing project management plan, and then you go and complete other plans. All the other plans are here. Majorly, some of them you should go with the sequence, but it's not a specific sequence that you have to go with, right? But it's highly recommended. Of course, you need to know what is the scope of the project to develop scope management plan, develop your stakeholder engagement plan, your communication plan. So those are the critical plans in the beginning. And at that time, you also go to get some requirements. So then you also go and complete your schedule management plan, cost management plan, resource management plan, risk management plan, and procurement management plan. As I mentioned earlier, those are your 10 knowledge areas and those are your 10 plans. All right. So those are 10 processes right there. Then you move on with the proper sequence. So after you complete some of the plans, and it can be done concurrently, all right? You can do at the same time some processes on the right side in the right box and some on the left side. So you start majorly, you need to know your stakeholders. And that's when you can go and start collecting requirements. And of course, you need to know communication plan, how you're going to communicate with the stakeholders. So you collect requirements, then you define the scope, what is the boundary of the project, create the WBS, work breakdown structure, define activities, sequence activities, estimate activity resources, estimate duration, develop your schedule, estimate the cost, determine budget. So that actually you have to go with the flow, all right? So all these processes on the right side are in specific sequence. And then you have to identify risk, perform qualitative analysis, perform quantitative analysis, and then come up with the risk response. So these are also risk management. 4 processes are also in sequence. So these processes will be in sequence, and once you complete those, you move on to execution. By the way, you may start execution while you are in planning as well. We'll talk about the overflow of or the overlap of the process groups later on. Okay. So in planning, the process is develop project management plan. All right. As I said, it's one of the important process. You start in the beginning when you start the planning, and once you complete all the plans, you complete all the other processes in planning, you complete this process. So develop project management plan is the process of defining, preparing, and coordinating all plan components and consolidating them in one integrated project management plan. The key benefit of this process is the production of a comprehensive document that defines the basis of all project work and how the work will be performed. This process is performed once or at predefined points in the project. So of course, when you start the project, you need to do this. And as every step, there is a requirement, you need to do it. So maybe in the beginning, you don't know all the risks. So you may not do qualitative or quantitative analysis in the beginning. That you have to wait for some time until you get to know more information, and you do progressive elaboration towards the project. And that's when you have to go and do some detailed analysis of the risk. So you run those processes whenever they are needed and required. And also that's when you engage or you start or you work out with develop project management plan also. Because all the other plans are subsidiary plans or subset of the project management plan. Now, project management plan determines the way of executing, monitoring, and closing the plan. The project management plan may be either summary level or detailed, and it should be baseline. Baseline means that you agree that this is what I will do, and from there onward, you're going to compare. So baseline means that will become your comparison point. Whatever you put in your project plan, that is what you will be compared with. So you are going to do one activity. Let's say you are going to paint the wall. Is this part of your plan? If painting the wall is not part of the plan, that means you're doing something extra, which you should not do. And that, by the way, we call it gold plating, doing something extra. The project management plan determines the way of executing, monitoring, and closing the plan. The project plan may, okay, so baseline, we already talked about it. At least it should define the scope, time, and cost so that the project execution can be measured and compared, right? So yes, as you move on, and while you are doing the project management plan, of course, other plans are part of it, right? And part of this is scope plan, your time plan, and cost management plan. Projects that exist in the context of the program that should develop a project management plan that is consistent with the program management plan. For example, if a program management plan indicates all changes exceeding a specific cost need to be reviewed by the Change Control Board, which is CCB, we also call it CAB, Change Advisory Board, then this process and the cost threshold need to be defined in the project management plan. For example, if the program budget is 5 billion, of course, your project cannot go beyond that, right? And if the deadline to complete the program is 5th of December, your project cannot go beyond 5th of December. So it has to be aligned with the program plan. That's basically what we are saying. All right, so the project inputs or the process inputs for develop project management plan, you have to have project charter, of course, output from other processes. Now, right now, when you start doing this, a process, you don't have anything, all right? So don't worry about it. But as you move ahead with the planning, with understanding more elements, with working with more processes, you will start filling this folder with more information. Enterprise environmental factors, right? And your process assets, different templates, previous documents, and so forth. Now look at the tools and techniques. So you have expert judgment, we already know this. Data gathering, you already know brainstorming. Checklist, okay, it could be just simple checklist, what you need for the project management plan. You have focus group. We already talked about it. That's when you bring in some key experts and someone is going to facilitate. Interviews, you already know your stakeholders and you can interview them. And then your interpersonal and team skills, which is conflict management, facilitation, and meeting management. Output is very simple. Look at the process name. The process is develop project management plan. The output is, of course, project management plan itself, right? So that's where, again, a focus on names. So here are the details of the inputs, which we already understand. We have the tools and techniques. Some of these interpersonal skills we'll go through later on. And of course, you have your different outputs or regarding the project management plan. So in this plan, you have multiple outputs. In fact, actually, the project management plan will have all these subsidiary plans. Of course, we'll have baselines as well, and we'll talk about the baselines later on. So majorly in the project management, you have three baselines. Scope baseline, which means what is the boundary of the project, the cost baseline, how much money are we talking about, and the schedule baseline, what about the time frame of the project. So these are the three baselines in your project management. And of course, we'll talk about them as we carry on. So develop project management plan. The other components that you have in project management plan, apart from the risk management, the procurement management plan, you have change management plan, you have configuration management. And by the way, here configuration management is not to configure your laptop or the system or a device or instrument. Here configuration management is about how do you monitor and control your document. That's called configuration management. For example, monitoring of this slide, right? I've shared with you. Can you change the slide? No, you cannot, right? Because it's shared in PDF. But let's say if you convert and you change and you still share or you still change, all right? But what we have in our records, that's not what you change. You just change your copy, all right? So we have configuration management, which is under our control. So this document, you cannot change without a proper approval or going through the proper change control process. So that's where configuration management is where you have all the documents, all the elements of the project, and it's supposed to be monitored and controlled. Then you have performance measurement baseline, project life cycle, what processes that you're going to implement based on how many phases you have. What is your development approach? Is it a predictive approach? Is it an agile approach or adaptive approach and so forth? Again, let's just talk about quickly. Predictive is waterfall. You complete a phase, you move on to next. You complete one phase, you move on to next. Mostly used in construction industry. And then you have adaptive approach where you go in loops and loops, all right? You get more information for client, you go do something, show them again, get requirement, again change, show them, again go back and change, and then move on to the next phase as well. Maybe a couple of phases, you run them in parallel as well. So that's most likely in IT industry, right? And then you have hybrid where you are going to use predictive and adaptive together. So management reviews. So you identify the points, what is relevant to stakeholders, what is important for the stakeholders. So that's where you need to go through the project management and understand stakeholders' perspective from the project. So this slide is very important. This is where you have project management items, all right? So you have about 18 different documents that are part of the project management plan. Again, you don't have to remember them. Just look at them, make sure that you understand. Once you understand, you're fine. Okay, so there's no link between the rows and columns, all right? So don't be confused. So you have about 18 elements which are part of the project management plan, part of this big folder that I'm talking about. And then there are different project documents, right? Somewhere around 33 documents, such as your assumption log, your change log, your activity list, your risk register. So all those are your project documents. Now, a quick question to you, and you need to answer me. How many of these project documents out of 33 do you know or have you worked on? All right. So when I say do you know means that, like, for example, risk register, do you know what is this? All right. Have you seen it before? Have you worked on this before? So I need a number from you. How many project documents do you know? All right. I'll wait for your feedback. And that is all for us today. I'll see you for our next session. Thank you very much. Take care.